Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Nice to have you. Welcome to the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about plant-based diets and their impact on the environment. We'll start with a few housekeeping issues. This webinar platform works best on Chrome. If you're having any technical difficulties, you want to close out and then restart your computer. Or if you won't have any other windows open, you'll want to close those as well. This is our 10th webinar from our webinar series. We encourage you to invite colleagues for any upcoming ones. They usually fall on the first Monday of every month, with the exception of some holidays like this month. We encourage questions for our presenters, and if you look to the left column of your screen, you'll see attendee chat. That's where you'll record your questions, and we'll leave time at the very end of the webinar to get those questions answered for you. And in order to receive the CE for this presentation, you'll need to complete the presentation evaluation that we'll be sending you just in a few days after this webinar. We always need a few days to get that to you. So thank you for your patience. And you'll complete that, and in the response email, you'll get your CE certification. I think that should be it. And for now, I'm going to introduce Barbara Sattler, founding member of Annie, and she's going to give us an introduction today.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. And I'm delighted to have all of the nurses who have joined today, and perhaps we have some non-nurses as well, and certainly among our speakers. My name is Barbara Sattler, and I'm a professor at the University of San Francisco, but I'm also a founding and current board member of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, and that's the overall umbrella that is sponsoring this webinar. Our mission is to promote healthy people and healthy environments by educating and leading the nursing profession, advancing research, incorporating evidence-based practice, and influencing policy. So we have a little bit of all of that as part of the webinar today. I do want to tell you a little bit about Annie, and that's what we call the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. It's not a person. We have 4 work groups that meet approximately monthly that are generally about nursing education, about clinical practice and greening our healthcare settings, about nursing research, and about policy and advocacy. And those are sort of generically around those different sort of modes of nursing. But we also have committees. So we have a climate change committee, and we have an international consortium of nursing organizations doing work on climate change. We have a number of nurses who continue to do work on energy, particularly fracking in the US. And Megan and I helped to launch the Food and Agriculture Committee, which, as she described, we've been sponsoring webinars. And every other month, we also then have a committee meeting. And this is part of the work of that. In addition, Annie has been part of a new initiative and helped to launch Nurses Drawdown. And we have our own website for Nurses Drawdown. And this is a collaboration with a number of nursing organizations, including Sigma Theta Tau, International Council of Nurses, and others. And this Nurses Drawdown, we're looking at 4 different ways of directly impacting greenhouse gases and climate change. Energy, gender equity, our built environment, walkable, bikeable communities, and trees and natural approaches. But also a specific component of it is moving us more globally. And that means individually and within our institutions like healthcare institutions and schools, moving us more towards a plant-based diet. And so this also webinar is specifically about that. I welcome any of you who have not been to our website. And Megan, if you could put our URL in the chat, room so that anybody who hasn't gone there, we do have a food and agriculture place page on there, and we will continue to grow that now that we have a food and agriculture committee. And 2 years ago or so, I, as a representative of Annie, went to a meeting, and Lasse was there, and I'm not sure, Audrey, whether our other speaker, Audrey, was there, but it was a meeting with people from all over the world to begin to think about how might we accelerate and amplify organizational and individual work to move us more globally towards a plant-based diet. And out of that meeting was the development of the organization 50 by 40, which we've invited Lasse, who is one of the senior staff people there. The goal of the organization is to reduce meat consumption globally by 50% by 2040, a laudable goal. And he is going to talk about how this grew from this little seed of a wonderful group of people that met 2 years ago into really a very, very robust organization and movement around this issue. And so we do have two speakers, Lasse Bruun, who was at that first meeting and has been really a guiding senior person within that movement. And we have Audrey Sanchez, who is with one of the member organizations. And we want you to know that there are numbers of really wonderful organizations that are now contributing to this collaboration. And so I'm going to introduce Lasse, and please, Lasse and Audrey, feel free to say a few things about yourself because I didn't get a bio on you, so I am not being a very good introducer here. But I'm going to turn this over to Lasse now.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's nice to have you on this call. I hope everybody is safe and sound, and in these crazy COVID times, and particularly if we are on the west coast of the US in these bad wildfire times, it's not a good time for people with tendencies for respiratory diseases or anybody else for that matter. So my sentiments goes out to anybody who has to endure that at the moment. So my name is Lasse Boon. I am the executive director of 50 by 40, as Barbara was saying. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. Originally, I'm Danish, as you might have picked up a slight accent here, and have spent most of my time, my adult life, living elsewhere. In the last 6 years, I was in Brazil to really embrace the aspects of the commodity food production and feed production there to see how that plays out and all the unfortunate negative effects of that. So today I'm going to be talking about different things, and I've just made, hopefully you can see me changing the slides here. So I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about land use and climate change, like the issues why animal protein is such a key thing for climate change in terms of land use and many other aspects, and of course of health as well. Talk a little bit about climate change funding and why that is such a crucial issue for what we're doing, a little bit about tractability and tendencies, about 50 by 40, the collective impact we do, a little bit about the collaboration partner initiatives, and the just transition within the food systems change that we're trying to foster, and then finally a little bit about on looking forward. So this looks like a lot, and it is, but I promise you it will be pretty straightforward, and I will try to be as swift as possible so we also have time for questions. So let me start by talking about a little bit about setting the scene, just get some basic figures on the table. So, agriculture and land use has so many negative effects already. You probably know a lot, particularly if any of you living close to CAFOs, like concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as factory farms, like in the vicinity, the water pollution, the air pollution, and so forth is a big issue. But it's also a global issue. No matter where you go, you'll see that there are massive problems with land use and sea use change as well, like heavy pollution of the oceans. And as a matter of fact, factory farming is one of the biggest drivers of species extinction and ecosystem degradation, and has a massive influence on greenhouse gas emissions, which I'll get a bit more into later on. And of course, we're talking about wildfires in the US, and the recent wildfires in the Amazon and elsewhere on the planet has been a big issue, but it's just like a few of the examples of what we're seeing, how climate change is accelerating destruction and presents a big problem for food safety and food security, all of which is exacerbated by animal protein production. And I wanted to just share some numbers with you here, which are quite staggering. I've seen them so many times because I talk a lot about this, but I still find it really staggering. So, of all the agricultural land on the planet, 77% is used to feed livestock, and only 23% obviously is used to growing other crops for direct human consumption. So you would say, well, okay, but people are fed well by meat and dairy, but actually the land that dedicated to meat and dairy only produces around 17% of the global calories, which, as you can see, is quite disproportionate how much space is used and how little actually comes out of it. Whereas the land dedicated to growing plant-based foods provides 83% of global calories on such a little piece of land comparatively. And just to put it into like a picture, if you imagine if we took all the land in the world and like kind of matched it with known spaces around the world to see like how much that actually is, then the land dedicated to livestock production globally equates the size of all of the Americas together. So Canada, US, Central and South America, all combined, all of that land together, the equivalent of that is used to grow, to produce livestock, either for direct livestock production as in grazing or the feed used for the animals. Whereas if you look at, you can see the slight purple, calling that 7%, that's actually the only piece of land comparatively that is used for growing crops for directly human consumption. So just to give you an idea of that. And when you look at the companies, how much, look at the big producers, how much does it actually mean in terms of emissions? Well, as you can see here, the top 5 main meat and dairy companies, a lot of those are the US based, like Tyson and Dairy Farmers particularly. They collectively actually account for more emissions than some of the 3 biggest fossil fuel producers in the world, so Exxon, Shell, and BP, British Petroleum. So this is quite staggering numbers. And just in a nutshell, without getting too technical, here is just to say, like, if the 2 billion high consumers in the world, that means like Canada, US, Europe, Australia, and so forth, if they cut their meat and dairy consumption by only 40%, that would mean freeing up an area the size of 2 times the size of India. So it's actually staggering numbers we're talking about here. And just briefly, just to give you an idea of how important it is, because there are many other ways to kind of like save land and to address issues of land use and climate change reduction. But if you look at this graph on the side here, with thanks to Clara for providing that, you can see how livestock, how much actually it can use to avoid emissions compared to, for instance, reduced consumption by healthy diet, like a slight change within eating animal protein, and also reduce food waste, which is a very hot topic now. But actually, shifting to better livestock production or limiting it dramatically has a massive mitigation potential. And when you then move on to talk a little bit about the funding of this, well, in average, 436 billion US dollars are used every year to climate change mitigation work. That is both public and private funding. And that constitutes like everything that's used across all sectors, like agriculture, energy, industry, and so forth. And out of that, less than 1% is actually used to address the issue of livestock production, which is completely disproportionate when you take into consideration that livestock globally accounts for at least 14.5%, and actually much more if you account some of the other land use factors, which I won't get into here now. But you can see that it's totally disproportionate, and of course it deserves much more funding to address the issue since it has so many aspects to deal with. So moving on to what's happening in the world right now, well, there has been some quite positive tendencies as of late. You will see depending on how long you've been around. That has been a massive change. I myself have been working in this field for about 20 years, and I have to say it's a very different playing field now as compared to 20 years ago. So in terms of shifting to more plant-based, whereas it used to be laughed at and actually totally dismissed, now it at least in some circles is starting to resonate with decision makers at subnational, national, and regional levels. So things are moving in the right direction, and you can see, for instance, there's some examples here in the slide of New York and California taking some measures into consideration, particularly on public procurement, including prisons and hospitals, and also like the example of Canada putting in place dietary guidelines that fosters a stronger, create incentives for more plant-based food and so forth. So politically, there are a lot of things happening. And if you look at the market powers, the market economy that's driving a lot of consumer behavior, well, there is been a boom. I'm sure all of you will know of a Beyond Meat and maybe also Impossible Burger. Not that we're advocating for those at all, but it is. We can refer to it as a transition food for people who want to move away from heavy meat-based diet towards a more whole food plant-based diet. A lot of these products can act as a transition food. It's not a solution with itself, just to be clear. But the way it has boomed over the last couple of years has been quite staggering. And so last year we had the Beyond Meat. They went on the market, the stock market, and they have the biggest IPO in nearly 2 decades. They just kind of like shot through the roof. So there's some interesting tendencies there. And to my point about it's not a solution by itself, I just want to mention that, like, from 50 by 40's perspective, if we were to move away from meat and dairy just to exchanging it one by one, let's say all Burger King and McDonald's and KFC, whatever, used only plant-based products that mimics meat in 10, 20 years from now, that would not be a victory. Because although there are huge benefits with making that shift, it doesn't address issues of equitable food distribution, of the core health aspects, and it doesn't address the issue of ensuring that we don't only focus on like so-called technical solutions, on new age solution, but actually talks about how we can enrich our dietary and culinary heritage for the benefit of everybody. So based on this and many other aspects, as Barbara was saying, 50 by 40 was put together to be a so-called collective impact organization. So as she rightfully said, our aim is to achieve a 50% reduction by 2040 of global meat and dairy production and consumption. Those are important, that's both production and consumption. And that's actually the global average. So that means like where a lot of you are based right now, and where myself based in North America and in Europe, it means like a 70 to 90% reduction by 2040. Whereas in the global south, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, you might actually see a slight increase. So it's a global average to make sure that that's like we use the equator principle that we need to give the global north to allow the global south to raise a little bit, keeping in mind that having the global south mimic the development the negative development that the global north has seen over the last 30, 40 years is not something that's aspirational. So based on that, we said, like, how do we do this? Well, we were very inspired by collective action. Collective action has a lot of elements to it. I won't talk you through all the details, but essentially it's a way of ensuring that a lot of organizations or groups or entities can work together at a quite deep level. So we're not talking about a temporary coalition that runs for like a couple of years or 5 years. We're talking about sticking together for the next 20 years and actually finding really strong way of working together. If you're more interested, you can look at Stanford Social Innovation that talks much more about this. But in essence, we want to move away from individual action towards coordinated action, and in the end towards collaborative action. Where we are right now is probably coordinated at the beginnings of coordinated action. As Barbara said, we're a very young organization, have a long way to go, but we want to create what we call deep radical transparency, which means that over the time, all of the member organizations of 50 by 40 should feel safe to talk about like individual internal strategies and also their weaknesses as organizations. So we collectively can work out the best ways to collaborate and have collective impact using having much stronger impact and using less resources to do so, both financially and human resources as well. So just to mention some of our core principles here, we're global. Well, we have a global approach. We are very keen on ensuring that that particularly pertains to food production, that we have a global approach because of the commodity trade and the necessity to meet nutrition deficiencies. We have deep collaboration, which I talked about already. We're equitable, which means that we have to make sure that, as I mentioned before, this is not just about creating vegan diets for people in Oakland, but actually ensuring that people around the world can have access and afford healthy food. It's intersectional. Well, we have organizations ranging from biodiversity, animal welfare, social justice, faith groups, and what have you, who are working together. Only by then can we actually create the best collaboration. We're innovative in the way we are approaching things. We are trying to maximize the ways to deepen our collaboration and find best ways of creating maximum impact. And we're transformative in the sense as of now, we're working on incremental change, changing policies and changing like procurement policies for hospitals, for instance, but also changing how corporates are dealing with the food issues and so forth. But over time, we want to be transformational because the food system is fundamentally broken and it needs a proper transformation. So we are working towards that again. And futuristic as well, which means that we are looking to find ways of ensuring the longevity of all the work we do, which entails also finding specific funding for our partners and also making sure a lot of that money, those $436 billion a year, much more of those are come over to address the issue of livestock, so we can ensure that it's giving the attention and the focus it deserves. And just here you can see these are our current strategic partners, and if you want to look into more who they are, you can go to our website 50by40.org. So just to mention a few of the things we've done together, for instance, very relevant to this group particularly, we have the Nutrition Climate Coalition convening, which we've been part of working on. We also have been engaging with eClay. Some of you might know eClay, like a coalition of over 2,000 cities and territories around the world who each year go together and do a massive global skill share on like how's the best ways to improve subnational and municipal governance issues. And we've been talking about the issues of how food, more healthy food, more plant-based food for public procurement, for hospitals, retirement homes, schools, prisons, so forth, can be a key part of that. Also, right now, we're working on divestment, which I'll mention a little bit at the end as well, which is around the issue of trying to get the biggest multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, the International Monetary Foundation, or the African Development Bank, for instance, to divest in bad food systems that are destructive to nature, to public health, and to climate change, and into more healthy food systems, which of course means more whole food-based food system production and consumption. And also very pertinent to the moment right now, one of our partners have worked across different partners as well, and with 50 by 40 to have a more detailed report on the intersectionality between food and COVID-19 and why it's so important to address the food system and not to go back to the business as usual and give more power to the food system that caused the problem in the first place. So just like a few thoughts on just transition. So some of you will know that just transition has been a key part of engaging the workers and trade unions in issues of climate change. So the head of the International Trade Union Confederation, who addresses all the issues around trade and workers and trade globally, she was asked about 10 years ago, why would a trade union person address the issue of climate change? And she said, well, there are no jobs on a dead planet. And that became kind of like a game changer that started resonating with stakeholders across the world, and particular decision makers who are always concerned about boosting the GDP and making sure there's job creation. So that whole game plan has been very efficient when it comes to the shift from fossil fuels to to renewable energy-based economy. And now we're starting to replicate that within the food system and actually starting to put together the data that will demonstrate and prove why shifting from a predominantly animal protein-based economy to one based more on plant-based food actually is a net job creator. It creates more jobs, it creates better jobs, better gender equality, safer jobs, and so forth. So that's part of the evidence base we're really building now. And to that end, we've recently had a so-called food systems dialogue with some of the more heavy players in this field. You can see the EAT Foundation, the Food and Land Use Coalition, the World Economic Forum, the ones who has the big meeting in Davos each year, and so forth. And you can see a little on the right side here, a little insight into some of the key institutions from around the world who engaged in that. Oops. Show my. There you go. Sorry about that. So looking forward, I just have like 1.5 minutes. So I'm just going to wrap up with that. So key issues we are key on addressing, like shifting the global financial flows. I already talked about that. That's very important because only when addressing that we can start eliminating the basis for having these destructive food systems. We want to talk about changing the global narrative. Like how do we change the narrative around food production? How do we say, well, actually moving towards more plant-based food is good across the board, even for the farmers, because it creates more and better jobs. Global South engagement, I mentioned that as well. Unless we find a more holistic way to address the issues and not focus too much on the global North, we're simply not going to cut it, because with a growing population, probably reaching 10.2, 10.5 billion by 2050, we need to have a pretty good game plan to make sure we don't have a breakdown of the global food production. The just transition, I just mentioned that, how important that is. And then empowering 50 by 40 partners. That means in terms of building ways for them to work better and work better together through the deep collaboration I mentioned, but also we are setting up a new funding platform where we are putting in place collaborative projects between our partners and match them with larger foundations, some of the bigger players like Ford or Rockefeller and so forth, who are keen on entering into this field now and want to have an opportunity to really engage and maybe not take too big risk in terms of doing all the basic groundwork. We're doing that for them. We're saying, well, here are some really good projects where you get much better impact because many more organizations are working together, and it's much cheaper than actually funding 5 different organizations to roughly do the same work. So that's another aspect. And in terms of driving more funding into the food system climate change work, that is not necessarily for the funding platform, but trying to again affect the biggest foundations in the world to drive much more of those $436 billion over to address these issues, so we can make sure we have a fair, sustainable, compassionate food production for all going forward. So we'll continue doing this the next. We'll continue doing that the next 20 and a bit years, so like until we reach 2040. I'll probably retire after that, but then let's see where we reach at that point. So if you have any further questions or anything, of course, I'll look into the questions now, and also feel free to reach out. My details are on the screen now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lasse. That was a wonderful overview. And also, it just seems to me that we could do a deep dive, a whole hour presentation on so many of the subplots that you presented, and perhaps we can invite you back again to explore some of them in more depth. It was just wonderful. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Audrey Sanchez. And once again, Audrey, if you could please say a little bit about yourself at the onset, that would be terrific. So thank you, Audrey.
And just a quick note too, if the other presenters wouldn't mind just using your microphones there while we have Audrey presenting. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all so much for inviting me here to share a bit about the work that Balance does. So like Barbara said, my name is Audrey Lawson Sanchez. I am the founder and executive director of Balanced. We are also, like 50 by 40, a very young organization. We were founded just over 3 years ago. And I love that Balance is going second, because I think this is a really, what I have prepared to share today is a really great way to leverage your expertise as nurses to create change in whatever environment in which you work. So this is going to be a lot more how than necessarily why, which is really sort of what Balance does. I imagine if you are on this webinar, you are already very interested in this work or this topic. So a lot of the why I will try and be more brief about, but if you have questions, certainly please interrupt. I will try and answer them as they come up. This also could be a 4-hour presentation. I'll try and keep it brief. But we are going to talk about ways that you can take this information, the information that was just shared by 50 by 40 and the information I'm going to share in the next few slides, and take action where you live or work. So let me move to the next slide. Balanced, a little brief overview. We are a public health and nutrition advocacy organization. We're focused almost exclusively on institutional nutrition policy and menu reform. So we do not do a ton of individual education or individual dietary change. We work to change environments in institutions like schools, hospitals, offices, universities, and a number of other community institutions. So we do that through 3 programs. The first is our grassroots, or what we call our community advocacy program. So we help people all over the world launch campaigns to improve the healthfulness of the menus in the institutions that matter most to them. So we sort of call it campaign in a box. We provide everything anyone needs in order to go to the decision makers in institutions and say, hey, I would like for this menu to have 20% fewer animal products and 20% more plant-based alternatives. So that's a guide, that's a toolkit with all the information you would need to educate those key decision makers. We provide unlimited one-on-one support for our advocates wherever they are across the world. We have run campaigns against one of the largest food service providers in the world. And we have also supported parents in schools of just 500 students and other school districts where they're serving upwards of 200,000 meals a day. There's no scale that is too small or too large for us to help build a campaign around. The second program that we have is our institutional outreach and support. So once an institution decides to improve the healthfulness of their menus, they often have a lot of questions about how to do that. And so we provided them the tools and resources that they need to reform their menus, to improve their marketing, to test new menu items, get back data, and improve from there. And then we also have a small but growing partnership policy program where we connect people with their policymakers so that there can be sort of larger scale nutrition reform or nutrition policy initiatives in communities around the world. So we have a pretty simple theory of change, and it's rooted in sort of having the biggest impact that we can with our limited resources. And so a lot of folks, there are a ton of resources to help individuals make dietary change for themselves or their families. There is just an abundance of information around how to shift to more plant-based eating, or menu items, how to cook recipes that your kids like. There are not as many organizations working at the institutional food environment level. And so we are hoping to help those institutions create more demand for this type of food by improving their menus. And we do that because we know that food environment has the greatest influence on food choice. Simply, people cannot eat what is not available to them. And that goes for unhealthy foods as well as healthy foods. And so when you survey people about how they're making food choice, a lot of times there's this misconception that people are just making food decisions based on what they want. But really, those food decisions are dictated by a number of factors. People are not making food choice inside a vacuum. So the biggest and number one factor determining what people eat is the convenience. Is it around? Is it available? Can they afford it? Does it taste good? And then further down the list are things like, is this healthy? Does this align with my ethics, etc.? So we know that that's the greatest influence. We know that institutional food environments serve a large number of people at once. Therefore, there is an opportunity to improve healthy food choices for a large number of people by improving those institutional food environments. And a little bullet point down here, if this theory of change were not true, if it wasn't food environment determines food choice, so we go into places where the food environment makes a big difference, the food industry would not be executing the same playbook, but they are. And so we are trying to get in there and help shape those food environments. Quick little background about the current dietary patterns of most Americans. I don't think this should come as a surprise to most folks, but most Americans are not eating a very healthy or balanced diet. So upwards of 60+% of food that people eat is processed or ultra processed food type products. Those are things like pastries, chips, but also chicken nuggets and any number of foods that have gone through the processing process. That's redundant, but any number of foods that have gone through processing. Then 25% of what most Americans eat are minimally processed or only slightly processed meat, eggs, dairy, and seafood products. And then this very small percentage, 12%, is about fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and plant-based or fiber-rich proteins. I did not put on this slide what the dietary guidelines recommendations are for a number of reasons. One, they are not necessarily optimally nutritious, but what I will say is that they're at a very basic level, 50% of what people eat should be fruits and vegetables, 25% should be whole grains, and then you're looking at between 15 and 25% being protein, but even a very small portion of that protein, about 5%, is recommended to be animal source proteins. The others are more fiber rich. As you can see, this sort of eating, these dietary patterns are not great for folks. Only 1 in 10 people consume the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables, resulting in 97% of people not getting enough fiber. 50% people consume 50% more animal products than is necessarily recommended, shakes out to being about 220 pounds of meat per year. And for context, the average American only eats about 165 to 175 pounds of vegetables per year. And so if you're thinking about, oh, wow, that proportion seems off because, most of our food should be fruits and vegetables. You're right, it is off. And 90% of Americans are consuming way too much sodium. Simply put, our diets are imbalanced. And there are there's a lot of folks make the case that in order to be absolutely the healthiest everyone or people should be, they should go completely plant-based. Whole food plant-based, no oil is a big move or a big dietary shift happening right now for a lot of folks. But really, even if we could start nudging folks to consume fewer disease-linked foods, so those ultra-processed food type products, meat, dairy, eggs, etc., and start consuming closer to even the minimum recommendation of health-promoting foods, we see some big shifts in health outcomes. So obviously, I feel like I don't have to dig too deeply into this information, considering this is likely a lot of the work that you are doing already. You see this firsthand. But unhealthy, imbalanced diets are literally killing people every day. In the United States, 700,000 deaths per year are associated with diet-related diseases. And when I talk about diet-related disease, I'm talking about heart disease, hypertension, stroke, any number of cancers, colon, breast, prostate, etc. That's, we see a heart attack every 40 seconds. We're starting to get more and more research into the effects of diet-related disease on children. And it's a really grim picture, to be honest. So just to clarify, at Balance, we don't often use the term or the concept of obesity categorized as a diet-related disease. We think there's just it's an imperfect way to measure health outcomes for a lot of folks. But when you start to dig into some of the data and you see that obesity rates have doubled in adults, tripled in children, and quadrupled in adolescents over the last 30 years, and then you start to see, early stages of atherosclerosis in children, things start to get a little bit tricky. In fact, there was a study that came out about 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, that showed that as a result of lifestyle-related diseases, the current generation of children is on track to being the first generation in over 200 years to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. And so this is not just this is bad for adults. This is very, very bad for everyone involved. And we know that diet-related diseases don't just spontaneously occur when you are, 65 and having a heart attack. Diet-related diseases are cumulative. And so we look to sort of shape food environments in places where children and families will be also. But the good news is that diet-related diseases are not inevitable. And there is a ton of information and research. And I actually did not put the sources at the end of this presentation, but I would be happy to bundle them and send them to Barbara if folks are interested, or my contact information is at the end of this. You can certainly reach out to me. Tons of research. This is, I am not I am simply the messenger of all of this high quality research and information that is being produced right now. But what we do know is that diet-related diseases can be prevented, they can be reversed, and it doesn't take an all or nothing approach. So an example of this is that for every 10% decrease in the proportion of unhealthy ultra-processed foods in folks' diet, and that includes meat and animal source proteins, you start to see a reduction in cancer risk that correlates or corresponds to that as well. Other really important things to know. I did not put this on the slide because I didn't want it to be too text heavy, but again, I will share all of this information for folks who want it. Even small shifts like reducing the total energy intake from saturated fat by just 5% could lower the risk of developing coronary heart disease by up to 42%. And there's, I imagine some of you are familiar, but there is the Harvard School of Medicine and School of Public Health Nurses Health Study that has been done twice, started in 1976. You can go to nurseshealthstudy.org to find out more information, but there is just an abundance of research that those studies have produced around the impact of slight shifts to dietary patterns and health outcomes. So I'd highly, highly recommend that. And this is just an example, a very quick example of what it looks like to make a really simple, quick menu swap that has huge impact on people's health, right? So this is not this is not overhauling an entire menu. This is taking one menu item that we found on a hospital menu and replacing it with a healthier alternative. So comparable calories, you can see it's, just about 100 calories off. It's not, you're not going to feel hungry after eating a veggie hummus wrap in ways like you're not going to feel deprived. But what you will experience is just dramatic reduction in saturated fat, no, like absolute reduction of cholesterol, and just cranking up the fiber. And so when we talk about healthier menus, we're often talking about a reduction in cholesterol, saturated fat, and sodium, and an increase in fiber, because we know those are the two components of dietary patterns that have some of the greatest impact on health outcomes. So I want to share with you 2 resources to help you make the case for healthier menus where you work. These can be found on the Balanced website. I will put them in the chat in just a second, but this will also provide more source information and the why versus the how that we're going to get to in a second. But the first is an impact calculator. So if you go to balanced.org/y-balanced, at the bottom of the page, you'll find an impact calculator. And it looks like this. You click on one of the food items, you put in the number of servings you eat, or the number of servings that you want to see the health or the correlated health impact for, and then it shows a scale. And so this is a little bit small on my screen. I'm not sure you can see it here necessarily, but this is for 3 servings, and it shows what health outcomes are associated with consuming 3 servings of poultry per week. And then on that same page, whatever food product you've clicked, it shows alternatives for those foods in diet, and then also for easy to implement recipes that folks can take right away. And so that's one place to sort of, like, for lack of a better term, beef up the information and the information that you have access to. The second is more about helping you influence change in institutions, change those food environments. And this is our scorecard. So our scorecard, you can find at balance.org/score. There's a 20-25 question questionnaire. You'll need a menu from whatever institution you're looking to get a score for their menu from. And you will answer questions based on the food that the menu items available for up to a month. And you'll answer some questions, it will calculate a score for you. And then based on that score, it will give suggestions for changes that need to be made. And then also our team at Balance, we will see when a menu has been scored. And if you're interested, we'll reach out and we will help you make a personalized plan for your institution. And, we provide resources to make that happen. If you go to balance.org/lead, you can find our community advocacy guide, get started with our toolkits at balance.org/menus. There's resources that you could take to your whoever makes decisions at your institution, your hospital, your healthcare facility, wherever, and this would provide them the resources that they need. But all of that is available on our website, balance.org, or you can reach out to us directly. Here's my email. You can find us on social media. You can just go to those 2 pages I mentioned, balance.org/lead or balance.org/menus. Look at the impact calculator, score your menu, and then we will be in touch to help you in whatever way that you need. So you can leverage your expertise as a healthcare professional to get healthier menus for the people that you serve. So if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you, Audrey, and to Lasse, both, for your time today. And we'll open it up to some questions. If anyone has any, just a reminder to put them in the attendee chat on the left-hand side of the screen.
Megan, I just wanted to interrupt for just 1 second there, because I wanted folks to know that within 50 by 40, there is a health science committee that you and I have been participating in, where we've been really digging into understanding where the evidence is. And that has been created into several documents that any of the nurses who are on the call today, we can share those with them, so that they're not always trying to figure out how to articulate where the health science is on this. So we were culling from the peer-reviewed research and reports and so forth. So just wanted to add that. And now we do have a set of questions. Megan, did you want to facilitate the Q&A?
Sure. There was a question about the impact of the pet food industry, and that if 50 by 40 would be having a plan to work with any pet food companies. Lasse, do you want to expand on that, or have me read what you wrote here? Basically, he said that currently, there you are.
Oh, sorry, I just took some time to unmute.
Okay.
No, happy to just elaborate on that. I can see some people are just on the phone. 50 by 40 do not work on that at the moment, but it is quite a significant amount of food that is used for pet food, and it has a big, tremendous impact on climate change and, of course, all the other aspects. A lot of people think of it as being predominantly just a byproduct and stuff that would be thrown away anyway, which is unfortunately not the case. It is like also the primary production. So there's a lot to be said about also providing plant-based food for your pets if and when appropriate.
And then Lasse, again, on the question about data on the job impact.
Yeah, in the US, so we don't have any very hardcore data, and it's not just 50 by 40, it doesn't exist, and that's why one of the reasons we want to get that data so we can provide the best possible forecast. But I put a link in the chat box as well, and like some from one of the forecasts made in other regions, one for Latin America and the Caribbean, which says that if you were to shift to a much more plant-based diet in Latin America and the Caribbean, by 2030, that would create 19 million jobs just by shifting to plant-based foods. So there's a massive positive gain for making this change. And in the coming years, we're trying to develop the data needed for all regions, including the US, so we can make the same good argument there.
Can I speak to that issue? This is Barbara. Annie is working on just transition issues around oil and gas workers, and it's just so we understand, it's very complex. For instance, in the Midwest in the United States, where we've got meat processing plants, many of these jobs are union jobs. The people get health insurance. Whole communities are built around these plants. They're horrible plants, no question about it, but they are providing jobs for these workers in the communities, and then those workers buy products in the community. They go to restaurants in the community, and so when you shift things, it doesn't just affect the folks that are working in meat. It affects whole communities that are supporting meat industries, and I think that we need to be very careful about how we do those economic forecasts about jobs, because we've watched when, for instance, coal industry leaves a community in West Virginia, the whole community implodes, not just the folks who literally went down into the mines those days. So I do think as nurses, we care for whole communities and want to make sure that we're understanding as we make these shifts that we are taking care of people along the way. And it may be ensuring income to communities, not necessarily sending those workers to work in farming communities doing different kind of plant production, which they're not involved in right now. So it's really quite complex.
Absolutely. So we will be sending these slides. Our guests are open to us sharing those, so we'll be sending those to you. One study that is of interest to us as healthcare professionals was from nurseshealthstudy.org. So that was reiterated in the chat here for those who are on the phone. And then we have one last question, it looks like. I think the question is, if I'm reading it correctly, Elena, is that you're wondering about the effects and presence of pesticides in food as it relates to plant-based diet or plant-forward diets. if that's how I'm interpreting that correctly. And I'll put that out to anyone to answer.
Well, I can take a quick stab at that. I mean, if you predominantly eat non-organic food, of course you will be exposed to pesticides through plant-based foods. But if you compare that to a normal meat diet, like all animal feed today is not only GMO, it's also very heavy on pesticides, very different cocktails of pesticides, and heavy on fertilizers as well. So there's the direct effect that you get through the consumption of meat, just as you ingest a lot of antibiotics and can develop antibiotic resistance. At the same time, you get exposed to many pesticides. So when shifting, whether you are eating some meat or eating only plant-based food, is very important to try to shift towards organic food where available and affordable, because it just has so many health benefits, and of course the long-term planetary benefits as well for the farmers who are producing the food.
And many of the nurses on this call might know about the environmental working groups lists of those fruits and vegetables for which, even if they're grown conventionally, have less pesticides, and those that have the most pesticides. And if you look up Clean 15, Dirty Dozen, just put those two things in a Google search, you'll get those lists coming up. But the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments is pretty clear about this, really wanting to make sure that we go forward with dual messages here about sustainably grown fruits and vegetables and no or minimum use of pesticides.
And so we have a couple more minutes. If anyone has any last questions, you want to put those in the chat now. Otherwise, I'm going to take this opportunity to thank our presenters today for this informative webinar. And the recording will be available on our Food and Agriculture website under work groups. I'm sorry, it should be under the CE tab on our website. And our website is envirn.org, but you probably know that. We're getting a lot of thank yous to our presenters. And with that, Barbara, any last words? And Barbara, nope. So we will probably conclude this webinar today. And
yes, I was
okay.
muted. I apologize. I just wanted to also just offer my thanks to Lasse and to Audrey. And we really do hope that we can continue work very closely with you as Annie moves forward on this issue area over the next several years. So thanks.
So thanks to everyone, and we will see you next month, probably for our Food and Agriculture call in lieu of the webinar. If anyone has any last minute questions, my email address is meganadelman@gmail.com, and it's spelled MEGHANADELMAN@gmail.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.